deviance such as enemy strain, control, and social learning to explain why people commit homicide. See, for example, Fox, Levin, and Canet, 2005. The assumption is that whatever causes deviance in general also cause homicide in particular. This might be a correct assumption, but here we will discuss two positivist theories that are specifically designed to explain the causes of homicide, theories that are derived from studies on homicide as opposed to other forms of deviance. External restraint theory. Developed by Andrew Henry and James Short, 1954, the external restraint theory is intended to explain why some people who are extremely frustrated commit suicide and others who are just as frustrated turn to homicide instead. Henry and Short consider suicide and homicide to be basically the same, both are acts of aggression fueled by frustration. Yet, these sociologists point out, the two acts differ in that suicide is aggression directed inward against oneself, while homicide is aggression directed outward against another person. This theory attempts to explain why intensely frustrated people are likely to choose one type of aggression rather than the other. The explanation is that intensely frustrated people would choose self-directed aggression, suicide, if they experience weak external restraint, but would choose other-directed aggression, homicide, if they suffer strong external restraint. Henry and Short define the strength of external restraint as the degree to which behavior is required to conform to the demands and expectations of other persons. In other words, the strength of external restraint is the amount of social control imposed on people so as to limit their freedom and range of behaviors. According to the theory, people who suffer a great amount of that kind of social control are more inclined toward homicide than suicide because they can legitimately blame others for their frustration. Martin Gold, 1958, has extended the theory of external restraint to include a factor that mediates between strong external restraint and murder. The mediating factor is the socialization in aggression by physical punishment. Gold believes that there are two types of socialization, that is, techniques of bringing up a child. There is some evidence to suggest that strong external restraint is associated with homicide. As we have observed, the lower classes and blacks have significantly higher homicide rates than do the middle classes and whites. Such a finding can be said to support the theory because the lower classes and blacks suffer stronger external restraint. There is also evidence to support Gold's theory that physical punishment received in childhood increases the likelihood of homicide in adulthood. Strauss, 1991. Still, all this does not mean, as the theories imply, that external restraint or physical punishment has a direct, subculture of violence theory. After analyzing his abundant data on homicide, Marvin Wolfgang, 1958, concludes, there may be a subculture of violence which does not define personal assaults as wrong or antisocial, in which quick resort to physical aggression is a socially approved and expected. According to Wolfgang, the violent subculture has such a grip on the poor that they engage in a wider range of violent behavior than the non-poor. This is because they associate and identify with the model of violence as provided by their parents, peers, and others in the poor neighborhood. At the same time, they are discouraged from following the counter-model of nonviolence from the larger society. Consequently, violence becomes a part of their lifestyles and their way of solving interpersonal problems. Not surprisingly, they consider the use of violence not only normal, but necessary for survival. They do not feel guilty about their aggression at all. Wolfgang and Ferracuti, 1967. Critics, however, have questioned the implication that a violent act necessarily reflects the act. Does the death penalty deter murder? Nowadays, many people believe that the death penalty is an effective deterrent to murder. Not surprisingly, to win an election, some politicians vow that convicted killers shall be put to death. Many sociologists, however, have observed that the death penalty does not have its hoped-for effect. The evidence supporting this observation has come in several forms. The first indication is the homicide rates in states that have retained the death penalty law are generally much higher than in states that have abolished it. See examples in Figure 4.2. Interestingly, when the 2010 data is compared to that of 2015, the relationship between the two rates did not change at all. Murder rates remain 25% higher for states with the death penalty. This clearly suggests that the death penalty does not deter homicide. It might even suggest to some observers that the death penalty causes more homicides. It could be the other way around, that is, the higher homicide rates cause the states to bring back the death penalty. Moreover, the South, where all the states have the death penalty, has a very large black population and a culture of violence, as reflected by its traditionally high rate of criminal violence and high level of gun ownership. Thus the distinctive population and cultural characteristics of the South, rather than the prevalence of the death penalty there, may be responsible for its higher homicide rate. The problem with all of this is that only a very tiny percentage of those convicted of murder are sentenced to death, and few of these are executed, even in the few states that still schedule executions. Figure 4.2. The death penalty and murder. Year 2000. 2005. Murder rates per 100,000 inhabitants are generally much higher in the 31 states that still retain the death penalty than in the 19 states that have abolished it, as exemplified above. Source: FBI, Crime in the United States, 2015. In view of this, some sociologists have excluded the southern states from analysis of the relation. A second type of evidence comes from comparing the homicide rates that occurred before and after abolition of the death penalty within the same states. Such comparisons have shown no significant difference in homicide rates before and after the states abolished capital punishment. Furthermore, the restoration of the death penalty in states that had earlier abolished it had not led to any significant decrease in homicides. A final piece of evidence comes from comparing the numbers of homicides shortly before and shortly after widely publicized executions of convicted murderers. If the death penalty has a deterrent effect, the potential for execution should so scare potential killers refrain from killing, and the number of homicides in the area should decrease. Apparently, this is not the case. In Philadelphia during the 1930s, for example, the number of homicides remained about the same in the period from 60 days before to 60 days after a widely publicized execution of 5 murderers. This finding, among others, suggests that the death penalty, even when publicized and performed, apparently does not deter potential killers from killing. In fact, publicized executions may have the opposite, brutalizing effect on potential murderers, indirectly encouraging them to kill.